Joining us right now on our program is the great pro football talk creator and the host of PFT Live on Peacock, which you can see, by the way, right here on Roku. He is none other than Mike Florio. How you been, Mike?
Great, Rich. How are you?
I'm still quite honestly stunned from your reporting over the weekend and last week about the Raiders and Jimmy Garoppolo's foot. So is it really the case that they signed Garoppolo and he fails his physical and they delay the press conference because they got to figure out the lawyering to get the Raiders off the hook for his money if he can't answer the bell due to this foot surgery, and that's their quarterback plan going into 2023? Did I read all that right, Mike?
Yeah, you're right, and we need to back that up a step.
Please.
This is one of those things that can arise when you've got that 52-hour negotiating window, the legal tampering period, as some call it. Because what happens, Rich, the moment the clock strikes 12 Eastern on that Monday of the week of the first league year, which is looming at 4 p.m. Eastern that Wednesday, when it hits 12 on Monday, it's open season on free agents, and teams start calling agents, and people already have a pretty good idea of who's going to be interested in whom, but that's when it becomes fast and furious, and that's when you will have a team call an agent and say, we want to sign your guy, here's the contract, we need to know now, because if we don't get your guy, we're moving on to the next guy. And they strike deals fairly quickly. And on that day this year, Monday the 13th of March, the Raiders and Don Yee, who represents Jimmy Garoppolo, had a deal that was leaked to the media within 2 hours after the legal tampering period started. So I can only assume, based upon the application of common sense, of which I have at least a little bit, that because the Raiders had agreed to give an $11.25 million signing bonus that went away completely and got pushed into base salary that he'll never get if he doesn't pass the physical, I can only assume that the Raiders were led to believe that he was fine when they made that commitment. So he shows up a few days later for his physical. The media is assembled in the press room for the press conference, and eventually everybody gets sent home. And, of course, we get the nothing to see here from the team and from Garoppolo himself the next day when it was all said and done. He poo-pooed it. He said there was nothing, just some language we needed to work out. No, it was a significant situation where he failed the physical and they needed to rework the contract to the point where he got no money on the way through the door. And we know how important the signing bonus is. It's the most important piece. It's cash in hand. It's the money you get for putting your name on a piece of paper. He got zero for that. He has to get this foot healed. He had surgery on it. I don't know why he didn't have surgery back when it happened. He had to get surgery in March after he signed, and now we wait for him to rehab and recover. And because it's him, of all the starting quarterbacks in the NFL, the fact that it's the guy who's the most injury-prone makes it seem like a bigger deal. And then you got Tommy hovering, which adds a little spice to it. But it really is amazing. And it all happened because this all came to light last week. And, it was a slow weekend, and I started thinking about and reflecting on what had happened with Garoppolo back in March. It's like, well, I wonder if anybody's looked at the contract. So, I made a couple calls and pulled a couple strings and got the contract. It's like, oh, my God, this was a big deal, as evidenced by the fact that they're not paying him a signing bonus, and they have this full-page waiver that makes it clear when you look at the rest of the contract, if he doesn't pass a physical, he's never playing for that team, and he's never getting paid a penny.
So let's just take it again one step at a time here. So they say, come on in, Jimmy. They sign him. He's physical. He fails it. Everyone's just like, go back to your homes. He failed his physical right before the press conference, or that came back from the doctor's office. I mean, is that really what happened on this front?
I mean, yeah, that's how it plays out because these deals get done. When you're talking about guys changing teams, you've got that 52-hour window where their agents can talk to the teams and negotiate. But you can't have visits. You can't even talk to the player. The Chiefs once lost a third-round pick plus for talking to Jeremy Maclin instead of his agent during that 52-hour window in one of the occasions where the NFL decided to enforce the tampering policy, but we know tampering happens all the time. Still, the last thing you can do is bring the guy in and give him a physical before you strike this deal. This is the problem. This is one of the flaws in this process. They strike the deal under the assumption that everything's fine. They bring him in to have the physical, the signing ceremony, the press conference. Everybody's happy. Everything's great. What's the delay? What's the holdup? What do you mean go home and come back tomorrow? And it was all about the failure of the physical and the heavy lifting they had to do to change the contract, to add the waiver, and to deal with the fact that the Raiders' position became, we're not giving this guy a penny. And look, if this all does go sideways for the Raiders, think of what else they might have done if they had known. You get caught up in that frenzy, we got to get our guy, we want Jimmy Garoppolo. I mean, they could have kept Jarrett Stidham. They could have gone after Sam Darnold. They could have gone after Baker Mayfield. They could have done all sorts of stuff. But they committed to Garoppolo, and all the other ships sailed away.
So what does the contract say? What does the new language say that now that you've seen it?
Well, it's a full addendum, coincidentally and appropriately, addendum G to the Garoppolo contract. It basically says, in layman's terms, he has to pass a physical, specifically on the condition in his foot, in order to ever get paid. He can be cut if he fails that physical, and they specify the injury. It's not just a blanket. If you show up with an injury, we can not pay you. It has to be tied to that foot injury he suffered last year, and there's a window where it's still in existence. There are triggers on when it goes away. If he's on the 53-man roster, I think if he starts at least one game, I think that's when the waiver goes away. But they're protecting themselves against the possibility he's never going to be able to play for them and that he's never going to pass the physical. Now, once he comes back and plays, different story. But this is all, we're not doing anything until we know this guy is fully healed and fully recovered. That's when this contract kicks in, and he hasn't passed the physical yet. And look, we assume he will.
Yeah,
but
sure.
I mean, how many times do we have supposedly successful surgery that goes sideways in the NFL? Every surgery is a success, and every player is well ahead of schedule on rehab until he's not. So it's just something to keep an eye on. And the fact that it's Garoppolo, I think, just gives it the extra intrigue.
Well, I mean, it's on top. Mike Florio of Pro Football Talk here on the Rich Eisen Show. It's just a wild scenario at the quarterback position to see in 2023 when we see every team out there trying to not only get their starter solidified, but their entire depth chart solidified based on what we saw from the San Francisco 49ers last year. You better have your head on a swivel if you're a third-string quarterback this year, right? I mean, more than ever before. And their plan was to take Derek Carr and send him home for Christmas and then go into the offseason. And then with all the options on the table, Lamar Jackson was available. Aaron Rodgers, we all thought maybe they can go in his direction too, right? I mean, there was so much on the table. They go for Jimmy Garoppolo, who winds up needing foot surgery to the point where they create, as you said, Jimmy Addendum G. And now, on top of all of it, you hear Davante Adams tell The Athletic that he does, quote unquote, we don't see eye to eye on what we think is best for us right now, meaning him in the front office. Now I can get it. You know, we all thought at the time when that came out for the Ringer, it's just, well, they sent my college BFF away, and now I got Jimmy G, and we're thinking, what's he got against Jimmy G? Well, if he knows that the guy's got foot problems, and this is his moment to maybe, you know, do it for the Raiders because of his contract coming up, that makes sense now that he's particularly irate over this situation. Yes? No?
Excellent point. Excellent point. Think about how differently we would view Davante Adams' comments to the Ringer if they emerged today versus 2 weeks ago. Today, you view them in a new light. Today, you get it. Not only did they sign a guy who isn't all that big at throwing the football outside the numbers to a guy like Davante Adams, but he's damaged goods. And they don't know when he's not going to be damaged goods. And that was plan A. That was their plan A. Not trying to figure out how to keep Jarrett Stidham around, not pursuing one of the other available free agents, not pursuing someone who is available via trade, not going after Aaron Rodgers, who Davante Adams wanted them to pursue. And look, once this went sideways, okay, it's too late for Mayfield and Darnold and Andy Dalton and other free agents. They could have, in theory, gotten into the Aaron Rodgers discussion, but by then that ship was sailing. And really, does Aaron Rodgers want to be perceived as plan B for Jimmy Garoppolo? I don't think so. So it all created a mess, and that's why, and this was a point Chris Sims made earlier today on PFT Live that I hadn't considered. At some level, the Raiders have to be very pissed off at Don Yee and or Jimmy Garoppolo for not being straight with them about what was really going on with the foot. And maybe they didn't know. Maybe they didn't know. Maybe. Let's at least account for the possibility that it was all an innocent sitcom-style misunderstanding. Regardless, the Raiders made the commitment to Garoppolo, and by the time they realized there was a problem, it was too late to do anything about it at the most important position on the field.
So I don't understand, Mike, when people are saying if it doesn't work out with Jimmy G, one of the owners will come out and play, because I don't think Mark Davis is. Well, hold on a minute. I'm being told Tom Brady was a Tommy you referred to earlier. What's the deal? Has he become a minority owner of the Raiders? Paperwork in, owners have to approve. Like, where does that actually currently stand?
Deal is struck. Now at least 24 of the owners have to approve.
Right.
And the wrinkle that I've seen in multiple reports, which I wasn't aware of, this idea that if he's an owner and he wants to play, there must be a unanimous approval by all teams, 32-0. And I thought it was kind of stupid and short-sighted because it's good for business to have Tom Brady on the field. Let's look the other way on any concerns we'd have. But over the weekend.
Let me just jump in,
like
though.
Having an extra guy on the roster.
If I'm an AFC West owner, I'm like, no, I don't think that's good for business at all.
Right.
Like, at all.
Well, and think of it this way: we've had teams. Look at the Broncos. The Broncos, when they had that COVID situation where they had to go with Kendall Hinton, the receiver and quarterback, because everybody got knocked out, everybody was a close contact or whatever it was, they broke the rules, whatever it was, they didn't have a quarterback. They wanted to make one or two of their assistant coaches quarterbacks. And the rule is you can't do it. You just can't do it because these are people who have access to practice. They have access to meetings. They have access to playbooks. They have access to everything. It's unfair to take somebody who is in this bubble of being around the team but not really on the team and putting them on the 53-man roster. It's like having a 54th guy on your roster. That's why teams would oppose it. So once this goes through, he's done. I would be stunned. Unless he sells his interest so he can come back and play, he's done. And I think he knows enough now, Rich, that if he has any interest in playing, you just press pause on finalizing the acquisition of whatever piece of the Raiders he's going to buy, and you do it next year or whenever you know you're never going to play again. I think that he's done.
Yeah, he is.
I've had somebody who is in a pretty good position to know his overall mindset tell me a few weeks back. He's done, but he likes it when this stuff comes out. He likes the discussion. He likes the intrigue. He likes the conversation. He likes being the center of attention, which I guess is somewhat refreshing to know that underneath all that robotic, manicured stuff, there's a real boy.
Like he's Pinocchio? No, I mean, literally, seriously, though, I think he's done, and I think he just wants to keep options open, but this is not an option. I don't think quarterbacking the Raiders, in his mind, is an option. And the only spot where he might even think for 2 seconds about it, the way it's been explained to me as well, from probably the same people you're talking to, although I wouldn't know, is Miami. But that's just all, conjecture and speculation. I just can't believe the Raiders, knowing all of this, went into the draft and Aiden O'Connell, they chose him out of Purdue. I mean, they didn't address it. I mean, Tyree Wilson is a terrific player. I guess this shows you what they thought of Will Levis too. I don't understand any of this. I just don't, and it's just really, really risky, incredibly risky. And there's Brian Hoyer as your safety net, who clearly anybody associated with the Patriots or their organization can't quit. It's nuts to me. This whole thing, my jaw was on the floor when I read your report, Mike. Honestly.
I mean, the only good news for the Raiders, Rich, is they potentially avoid ever paying Garoppolo anything.
Maybe.
If it doesn't work out, okay, great. You didn't pay him the money. Who's your quarterback? That's the bigger issue. And I think that's why it stayed secret for more than 2 months. Usually when something gets leaked, a party to the transaction wants it to be out there because they're proud of what happened. In this case, there's no one proud of what happened. Garoppolo had to give up his signing bonus. The Raiders are in a spot where they may never have Garoppolo, and their plan B is Brian Hoyer and Aiden O'Connell. That's why it didn't come to light, because there was no motivation for anyone involved in this to say to the world, hey, look at what we did.
Mike Florio here on the Rich Eisen Show. Last one for you. Perfect guy to have on as this news is breaking right now, because you not only know football, but you also know agenting and all that. Clutch Sports just signed DeAndre Hopkins. What do you think that means as Hopkins is no longer representing himself, and where things stand on that scenario that dropped into the football laps on Memorial Day Friday?
Well, Rich, that dovetails with things we'd been hearing because Hopkins had been representing himself. And what that means for a lot of the guys who represent themselves is they have somebody who isn't certified by the NFL Players Association who is actually doing the representing for them. And the NFL has been sensitive to that in recent months. We had the Lamar Jackson, Ken Francis memo that went out, don't talk to Ken Francis, who we reported was calling around to teams to try to get teams interested in making a run at Lamar Jackson via the offer sheet process under the franchise tag. Last year, it was St. Omni, the notorious St. Omni, who was reportedly calling teams to try to get someone to trade for Roquan Smith when he was unhappy with the Bears. And the St. Omni name has been percolating around with DeAndre Hopkins to the point where I was told the teams are very leery about dealing with him. And one of the things that happens when guys represent themselves, they set up dummy email accounts where they pretend to be themselves communicating with the team, but it's this off-the-books agent who uses the email account. Teams, I'm told multiple teams, would only talk directly to DeAndre Hopkins and not email him because of this practice of using the burner account. So he wisely hires an agent, cuts out any of these potential complications as he now embarks on what's not going to be an easy negotiation because he's going to want to get paid, and the teams that are out there that want him are not going to want to give him the kind of market value money he may be looking for. But at least there's going to be a free flow of communication between teams and the agents while they try to figure out the next move.
All right, so now that those decks have been cleared, who do you think is in on this conversation? What do you got?
I think the Bills and the Chiefs are the two teams to watch now. And I think they always have been. They're the two teams Albert Breer reported had spoken to the Cardinals before the draft, and it was the Odell Beckham $15 million fully guaranteed for 1 year that sent things sideways because that has ripple effects on the market and what guys think they're worth. I mean, teams haven't been willing to trade for the salary, $19 million plus, so he becomes a free agent, and they now have to decide, do we want this guy? And I think the other thing that makes it very advantageous for the player and for his new agent, if you go to the Chiefs, not only do the Chiefs benefit, but the Bills don't get him. If you go to the Bills benefit, and the Chiefs don't get him. There's extra value in that can be leveraged to get the best possible deal because you are helping yourself and you're hurting one of your top contenders for the same prize everybody's trying to get. And if Hopkins plays it right, he could end up getting maybe more than he otherwise would have gotten.
And then in terms of the Cardinals, before I let you go, Mike, I always say here, it's really tough for NFL teams to tank because you can just remove capital or remove terrific players from a roster. There's always going to be grown-ass men that pad up and helmet up and cleat up every single playing week who try their hardest. Nobody's ever going to tell a guy in the NFL, don't try as hard today and we'll take care of you because they don't trust that situation. They only trust their own level of play. They could turn out to be, say, Shaq Barrett, right? You make your most and then you hit it. So all that said, this week, June 1 is an important date, and I'd love for you to explain what the Cardinals are going to do with the cap number with what they are apparently are going to do by releasing DeAndre Hopkins, who hasn't technically been released as of this conversation. Can you walk us through what that decision looks like and what it may actually portend?
Simple as it can. There's a $22.6 million total dead money charge that applies to Hopkins for money previously paid to him. Now, if they cut him today, and it's expected they'll cut him today, by rule, the full $22.6 million hits the 2023 salary cap. If they wait until Friday to cut him, $11.3 million hits this year, $11.3 million gets pushed to next year. They've decided to take the full cap charge this year, basically taking away $11.3 million they could have worked with this year if they wanted to just keep it around. And you don't have to use it. You can not use it and roll it over to next year. It used to be cumbersome to roll over cap money. It's easy now. You snap your fingers, you flip a switch, and the money rolls over to next year. And by taking that $11.3 million off the table, cutting him today, the message is, and I know Cardinals fans don't want to hear it because they want to think their team's going to be as good as it can be this year. The message is we don't care. We're not going to keep that $11.3 million around to possibly spend on a player who makes us better this year because we're not interested in that. We're interested in it next year. This year, we're going to take our lumps. This year, we're going to clear the books. This year, we'll take the cap charge. Next year, we'll have the money, even though they could have had it next year anyway if they didn't spend it. But here's the key, Rich. If somebody becomes available that would be great for the Cardinals, that we aren't expecting, that we aren't thinking about, and they're up against the cap, well, it's an easy reason not to go after them. We don't have the cap space. Well, yeah, you don't have the cap space because you could add an extra $11.3 million this year that you refuse to take. So it's a very subtle, nuanced indication that they don't care about this year, and they're going to try to get right next year. And it's probably smart.
Oh, yeah.
When you look at it, but it's still an acknowledgement by the Cardinals that that's where they are.
Well, the smart thing is to do it next year. And then since your quarterback and Kyler Murray isn't healthy enough to play at the outset of this year, and then who knows how it all plays out, and then you tell him, sit back and get ready. There's no reason to bring him back when your team's 1-6, 1-7, 2-6, or anything like that, which is why I said, at the outset of hearing this news about DeAndre Hopkins, if I'm Kyler Murray, I have my head in a swivel that I don't turn into Josh Rosen with Caleb Williams coming out next year.
Right.
No, but I don't want to be accused of being a conspiracy theorist, Mike.
No, you don't want that. You don't want that.
But I'm serious.
You don't want that.
You know what I mean?
You know what? There's 4 other spots in the top 5, Rich.
But in all seriousness, though, I mean, that's the way this thing can play out in Arizona. No question about it. This thing can play out like that.
Yeah,
right?
and it tracks beautifully. And the only spot where it short circuits is they won't be hiring Cliff Kingsbury to be the coach next year, coming from USC to coach Caleb Williams at Arizona.
Oh, my gosh. Just Lincoln Riley. Who knows?
Yeah.
I mean, good Lord. Thanks for the call, Mike. Greatly appreciated. Great stuff on the Raiders, and I can't wait to see it all play out. Let's chat soon.
Mom. Great talking to you.
Right back at you. That's Mike Florio. Everybody check him out at Pro Football Talk. Catch the Rich Eisen Show every single day on the Roku channel, 12 to 3 Eastern, for free.